chug, 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 and...
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Wizard Staff Podcast. I'm your host, Blake.
And I'm Guy.
And we are two drunk novices who like to talk about EDH. We do drink and swear, so you've been warned. Please drink responsibly when playing children's card games. Tonight, we are going to be discussing the latest set to come out in Magic the Gathering, which is Duskmourn. Big, spooky, scary house that has somehow taken over the entire plane, and it is a nightmare hellscape, literally.
That's right, it's not the cute animal set that Bloomborough was.
They had to have done that on purpose, like literally gone from like the cutest of the cute to like, in theory, the darkest of the dark.
Yeah, we can't be too happy. They gotta even us out, you know?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So tonight we will be discussing the Duskmourn main set and the 4 corresponding commander decks, because as we all know these days, every main set has 4 commander decks. That's just how things are now. This is the world we live in. And so we're going to be breaking up all this information across 2 episodes. Right now you're listening to part 1, which is going to be covering the new commanders in the main set, as well as the relevant cards worth talking about for the corresponding commander decks. And then in the following episode after this one, we are going to be discussing all of the 99 cards in the main set. We just feel like there's enough to talk about. We wanted to try and split it across 2 like digestible episodes instead of having 1 3-hour episode.
Yep.
Well, without any further ado, we got to talk about what we're drinking before we start talking about the set. Guy, what are you drinking tonight?
Well, I walked down to my local wine store and I picked up a Cabernet Sauvignon. This is Apollo Summit Creek. It has some taste characteristics of ripe blackberry, raspberry, and a touch of spice. On the palate, this well-balanced wine offers a delightful aftertaste that keeps on giving. I just read the back of the bottle.
No, I was going to make the joke like, wow, Guy, that was really eloquently said. Like, I'm surprised that you thought of that right off the top of your head.
Well, I realize not often do I have anything to say about alcohol other than I'm like, yeah, it's good, I'll drink this. But, you know, there's probably been a bunch of times where I could have just read what's off the back of the bottle to give a more eloquently put thought than, yeah, I can drink this. What are you drinking, Blake? And what does it say on the back of the bottle?
Drinking a Locust cider, which is very local to me, and it is their semi-sweet, juicy peach hard cider. That's right, I'm very much a cider guy, very Seattle of me. And then the back is, I'm not sure you want me to read the back, because it's talking about like how like the founder was like attacked as a teenager and was lucky to survive, and like they like have a medical condition, and that's kind of like how this whole brewing company was founded, was for a good cause.
It kind of sounds perfect to talk about for Duskmourn.
Being attacked by the maliciousness of the world and like still striving to create a better one. Yeah, I suppose so. It's tasty.
Nice.
Alright, so without any further ado, let's do a little bit of background to get everyone up to speed. Maybe they're listening and it's like been a couple of years and you're like, what the heck was Duskmourn? So basically, Duskmourn is a plane of the multiverse inspired by horror media from the 1980s through to the 1920s. Lots of horror movies. So if you watch a lot of horror movies, you probably are familiar with a lot of these tropes and a lot of this iconography that's in this set. Duskmourn is a modern-looking world, including electronics like television sets, mechanical devices like chainsaws, and 80s-style fashion like sneakers. And without kind of getting off on a tangent to that last bit of information, has kind of been a little bit of contention for the fan base in terms of like some people have said how it's pulled them out. I know like various sources have kind of explained why those creative choices were made. Like, WotC is aware that these features kind of are different from the typical high fantasy world that you come to know and expect from Magic World IP, but they did it for very specific reasons. It's like, and I won't go into all of them, but it's like, imagine trying to do like a clearly horror media themed set without all these like chainsaws and saws and like ghost vacuums and etc etc. Anyway, we can talk about that a little bit later. But also, I'm not going to get into the whole plot of this realm, but basically there was once this mansion that was haunted by a demon, and a deal was made. And unfortunately, as always, making a deal with the demon, there's a downside. And instead of this demon being limited to just the house, they expanded the house to cover the entire world. And so now this entire world, like, has all these different maze-like rooms that are basically the entire plane. Even if you're in a cornfield, you're actually still in the house. You'll see floating windows, you'll see floating doors that will just lead to other rooms. The entire world is just a giant house. That's all you need. That's the quick version you need to know.
Yeah, I feel like, kind of going back to what you were saying about the television and chainsaws, stuff like that, I feel some recent sets like, well, a lot of the Universes Beyond stuff, I guess, have kind of, gently nudged us in a introduction to stuff like that. So seeing, spaceships on like the Doctor Who cards or guns on Warhammer, I feel like, to me that was kind of the introduction to like some of this stuff could maybe appear on Magic cards in the future. So personally, I wasn't bothered by it, and I think it makes sense, especially when it's going for this theme. And I mean, the next theme in the standard cycle of like storytelling is a death race, so think like Mad Max type thing. So I feel like we're also going to see some non-traditional fantasy tropes or things there too. So, they're easing us into it instead of like pushing us into the deep end.
That's true. Like, I think myself, as well as a lot of other people in the fan base, kind of just hope like this doesn't just become every single set,
Right. I don't think that would be the case necessarily, but yeah.
Like, I'm willing to like bend a bit for like certain sets such as this that have like ghost vacuums and like certain technology that, as various WotC sources have pointed out, like they can malfunction at any moment, especially if they're electronics based, which adds to the horror of like when you need the flashlight the most, like maybe it goes out and flickers because it depends on like technology that is old and like of a time that's not reliable. Anyway, don't want to get off on a tangent. We're going to move on to the rest of the intro, which is talking about the notable reprints. Let's start with the main set. And honestly, there aren't that many reprints. The major one, when I looked through really quickly, was Leyline of the Void. And even then, that doesn't see a whole lot of Commander play, if I'm being honest. I'll see it every once in a while. But the exception to this, as we were talking about before this podcast, is WotC tends to be doing this thing called a special guest, where instead of a new set coming out and it not having a whole bunch of reprints, they've basically like been like, okay, well, we'll have this thing called special guests, and we'll put about like 10 of those reprints with like oftentimes new art that are relevant to the plane. And those cards, I'm just going to list them off here. There's only 10. Those are Hallowed Haunting, Soul Warden, Expropriate, Phantasmal Image, Damnation, Sacrifice, which is a big one. That one has not had a reprint like ever. Maddening Hex, Unholy Heat, Collected Company, and Noxious Revival.
Pretty good list, gonna be honest.
Yeah, some of them obviously for other formats, such as Unholy Heat or Collected Company, but some of these definitely see Commander play, like Expropriate, Damnation, of course, Phantasmal Image, of course, Noxious Revival, yes, and as I said, Sacrifice is, in my opinion, the really big one. Like, up until now, it has not had reprint, I don't think.
Yep.
And next up, notable reprints for the corresponding commander decks. And they are commander decks where it's sort of flipped, where like a majority of these commander decks are reprints, and there are about like 10 or so new cards in each of those commander decks, give or take. So, I mean, there's just a lot of reprints. There are some promos such as Cryptghast, there's Dam, Exhume, Archon of Cruelty, there's Goyo's Vengeance, and Living Death. Again, all of these have, like, these 6 promos have stylized art. But then there's, like, the normal, quote-unquote, normal reprints in the form of, I mean, there's so many. There's, like, Sigil of the Empty Throne, like, Sphere of Safety.
One of the ones I was going to say is they included Arvinox, the Mind Flail, which is interesting only because it was one of the Stranger Things cards, but it was then turned into a Magic IP, and now it's found its way into a commander deck. So it could be, you know, maybe we'd see more of those cards that, like the Rick card that I know people were like really hyped about, but then they didn't want to play with Rick, so they made the actual Magic card. So it's like, maybe we could see stuff like that in these decks in the future.
I would like to see that. And I know specifically with Rick, a lot of, like, Winota players, like, were like, please reprint. Please reprint. It's like, with the Magic IP version, and it took like 2 years. So it's like, if I'm a fan of any way that that WotC can take Rick and turn it into like the Magic version in like any product. Yeah. Anyways, there's a whole bunch more reprints like Professor Onyx and Sir Conrad, Blasphemous Act, Chaos Warp, etc. Yeah, a whole lot. So anyways, I'd like to move on to the real meat of the podcast, and I'd like to talk about all these new commanders. Yeah?
Oh yeah.
But before we talk about the new commanders, we gotta do our famous section called Nothing to Say Commanders. These are commanders that we have basically nothing to say because they're very boring and already do things that exist, or they do something new, but like we just have 1 or 2 things to say about them. So Nico, Light of Hope, is like an Azorius version of Nico. Like he's Azorius, like Flicker, that's really it. Then there's the Jolly Balloon Man, which is kind of a parody on It, the clown. Cool art, I will say. However, it just goes sort of like makes tokens by tapping, and it has haste, and then the tokens have haste, and they leave, and so it's just like a Boros token generator, which kind of exists, and so it seems sort of one note. There's like 5-color Marina Vendril, which is like apparently a key character in the lore. However, it just kind of cares about the first block of text cares about like enchantments, and then the second block of text is a tap ability to like unlock rooms. So like if you care about rooms, this is probably the commander for you. And if you want to do 5-color enchantment deck, like people are trying to make that happen for a long time, like this is, I guess, another option. Then we have like a Selesnya commander called Rip. And honestly, like I've read it a couple times and I forget what he does every single time because he's so boring. And then there's Victor, which is an Azorius commander with Eerie. Eerie is basically Constellation, so whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield, you do some sort of effect. But Eerie is that, but in addition, it also triggers when like you unlock rooms, which are a new like card type that we will explain later on. Again, an effect that does something that's kind of been done before, or just very like mediocre. So with that, I'd like to move into our actual commanders that we have things to say. And as usual, we are going to go in Wooburg order, meaning white, blue, black, red, green. Guy, why don't you take us off with these first 2? Because I know the second one you really want to talk about.
Yeah, so this first one is Toby, Beastie Befriender, 2 white legendary creature, human wizard. When Toby enters, create a 4/4 white beast creature token with this creature can't attack or block alone. As long as you control 4 or more creature tokens you control have flying. So this is a good stuff tokens type deck if you are building around that theme, which I feel is pretty common in mono white strategies, like white weenie type stuff. This is a very cheap way of being able to give your creatures evasion. I mean, all of them have flying. That's pretty big. And I think also a 4/4, this is 5 power for 3 mana. That's also like a pretty good rate for white. It is 2 creatures, which that's not like that bad, but you know, this is pretty good.
That is a great point. I hadn't really thought about that. Like its stats versus its mana cost and how it sort of makes up for it with the token it makes. Yeah, that's a great point. I'd say the other thing I'd add to this is that this is like one of the few cards that sort of has the specific text that says like, that's basically giving your token creatures a certain ability, because a lot of cards say like your creatures in general have this ability, but like this card and like Elder, Arthur, Maxis are like 2 recent cards that say creature tokens, specifically tokens you control, have an ability. And so I'm wondering if that is something in design wise we will see more going forward, since they're both somewhat recent cards. And the other point I'd like to say is this is a very affordable card to cast. It is only 2 in a single white pip, so I can totally see this in multicolored decks with white in their color identity that naturally make a lot of creature tokens and just want to give them evasion. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, you can slam this down really at any time late in the game if this is your commander, to just then give all your creatures flying. That's pretty good.
Yeah. I think we can both agree it's good as a commander and as the 99.
Yeah, I would say so. So good, in fact, that I actually included it in my new deck for the Wandering Rescuer, who is our next commander. 3 white, legendary creature, human, samurai, noble. She has flash and convoke, so that means that your creatures can tap for either a generic or 1 mana of that creature's color. She has double strike, and other tap creatures you control have hexproof. So a big way that I built this was trying to focus on creating a bunch of tokens that would allow me to cast her pretty early, and then having a lot of things that would care about being tapped. So, you know, you have pretty good cards like Mother of Ruins, Giver of Ruins, which want to tap and give other things like her hexproof or, you know, protection from a certain color.
That's smart.
And then, yep, thank you. And then, you know, things that like would want to be attacking, because, you know, creatures that attack are being tapped. So like Adeline, Resplendent Cathar, who then also gives you a bunch of creatures for each opponent you're attacking. So then that can just kind of help in a way of being able to, you know, recast the Wandering Rescuer if you need to later in the game.
Yeah, she's really got it all. Like, at first when you read this card, like, oh, 5 mana casting cost, like, oh, that's a little bit like high for commander these days. But then you see that it's got flash, convoke, and double strike on a 3/4 body, and you're like, okay, that doesn't seem so bad anymore. Like, it's super easy to cast, especially at an opportune time, and it really encourages like combat tricks with that very last ability. I would like to advocate that this is, you've talked a lot about how she's great as a commander, and I would like to advocate that she is also great in the 99 of decks, specifically in relation to that last ability. I'd say she's very similar, or I should say reminds me of Sereth the Viper's Fang, which is a 4-mana legendary creature, human warlock, that says other untapped creatures you control have hexproof. And as someone who's played against a deck playing Sereth, the fact that, like, quote-unquote half the time my opponent's creatures have hexproof really makes my life difficult. And so I feel like it's going to be a similar play pattern with the Wandering Rescuer, whether they're the commander or as the 99. Like, basically half the time, your stuff is going to be hexproof, and that's going to make your opponent's lives really difficult. I was also thinking the fact that, like, wording, like, is sort of being used more and more often. Like, just recently, Murders of Karlov Manor had a blue enchantment called Lost in the Maze that says, like, your tapped creatures you control have hexproof. So I'm wondering if we're going to see more of this type of ability going forward.
We could. I mean, it would encourage, play patterns like having to attack, or, not wanting to be so defensive, I guess.
Yeah, I think it encourages, like, dynamics within the combat step, which is definitely design space I want to see incorporated into a commander, because, like, I think you and I both heard, like, arguments like, as power creep inevitably happens in commander, people are, like, less incentivized to care about combat, which is a step that arguably doesn't matter as much as you get higher in the power level, but that's a discussion for another day, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, this next card is kind of cool. Can I read it?
Yeah. I mean, talk about some stats, but...
Yeah, this is super cool design. We're moving into blue, and this is the Mind Skinner. It is blue. So 3 mana. It's a legendary enchantment creature Nightmare. And it is a 10-1. You heard that correctly. It is a 3 mana 10-1.
Dies the lightning bolt.
You got me there. Dies to, like, most red damage spells, right?
I mean, it just has to deal 1 damage, so I think so.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, why does it have this crazy stat line for being only 3 mana? Well, the Mind Skinner can't be blocked, which is cool. But here's the thing. If a source you control would deal combat damage to an opponent, including this card, prevent that damage, and each opponent mills that many cards. So really, here's what this card does. It's a 3 mana 10-1 that can't be blocked, which is sweet, so you swing in, but instead of dealing 10 damage, it's going to mill your opponent for 10 cards. And it's not just this creature, like, this can be your commander, so if you have a bunch of other blue creatures, like, those, instead of dealing damage, are going to mill. So, in a way, this is basically a mill commander. And I know what you're thinking, like, okay, Blake, we already have a mill commander in Commander. That is Bruvak. True. However, I think this is much spicier design. Bruvak is kind of, like, really linear and, like, obvious as a mill strategy. Like, it's cool because it's, like, so straightforward, like, it's obviously, like, the mill strategy, but I feel like this adds dimensionality to that archetype.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because in a way, it can encourage a Voltron, mono-blue Voltron type strategy. Not so much that you're trying to kill your opponent with the 21 commander damage, but hey, if I can deal 20 damage, maybe even twice, that's 40 cards going to the graveyard for each of my opponents. They'll eventually just can't draw cards. So I think it'd be kind of cool to kind of go in a direction where you cast this and you try to get this thing as big as possible to then mill your opponents for as many cards as you can. And the other thing too is, like, blue has a lot of small can't be blocked creatures. Mm-hmm. So, this isn't the only thing that's going to say, like, hey, prevent the damage. Those creatures can also then attack. You would prevent that damage and mill that many cards. So, I think that this is a more interesting design space for blue in the mill strategy.
All right, would you like to read this next card, which is like the big bad of the set?
Yeah, Volgavoth, Terror Eater, 6 black, 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 so it's a 9 mana. Legendary creature, Elder Demon. Flying lifelink, ward, sacrifice 3 non-land permanents. Jeez. Okay.
Yeah.
If a card you didn't control would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. During your turn, you may play cards exiled with Volgavoth. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay its mana cost. So that last line of text is sort of a Bolas's Citadel, right? Like that's another card that does that.
I mean, in the sense that you can pay life instead of paying mana, yes.
Yeah. I guess the one thing that I don't know for certain is if Volgavoth leaves the field and then you recast it at another point, it's considered a different card at that point, where then you can't cast the cards that were initially exiled beforehand, right? Because it's a new card when it comes back, right?
I think so. Like, I'm not a judge, but it's not like Dothy Voidwalker, where it still has like that counter on it that only Dothy Voidwalker specifically gives. So I believe you're correct.
Okay. I mean, this still is kind of a this doesn't die to lightning bolt. This thing will probably land and like stick around for a bit. Considering like if you want to target it, okay, sacrifice 3 non-land permanents is no joke of a ward cost. So, you know, you can get this into play. Yeah. It's gonna stick.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the quote-unquote boss monster of the set, where like it's like a 9 mana 9/9 flying lifelink, and it's hard to get rid of with that ward ability, and then it has on top of that like an effect that basically lets you play your opponent's cards in a way indirectly.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, I did sort of think about like how like Turgid God of Fright came out, and that's a deck that really says like, oh, I'm gonna play my opponent's decks completely, and just the play patterns of that deck, I think rightfully so, are salt-inducing. People get salty, people get angry, and so Valgoth kind of is in that space where like, oh, I play your cards, but in a way where the text does it in a quote-unquote fun way.
Right, and Turgid's only 3 mana too, so it's kind of easy to put down.
I think Turgid's like 5 mana.
Oh, Turgid's 5 mana? Oh, jeez.
Well, still.
Okay, yeah, it's 5 mana.
Still a lot less than, 9?
Yeah, for sure.
Anyways, I know you just talked about a card, but maybe you should read this next one too.
I mean, I was initially hyped for this card, but after thinking about it, I was like, okay, let me read it first and then I'll explain my thought process. So, Norn, Swift Survivalist. That's right, Norn's back.
Yeah, baby.
He only still costs a red pip. Legendary creature, Human Coward. Not much has changed. Norn can't block, and whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may exile it. You may play that card from exile this turn. So when I initially read this, I was like, oh, sweet, this is a 1 mana value red drop creature. Love that. And I can then recast cards if I attack, and people will then allow me to blink them and then get some pseudo like blink type shenanigans going on. So like, oh, you blocked my dockside, I'll just exile it and then, you know, I'll replay it for 2, get a bunch of mana. So I was initially hyped because, okay, I can get a lot of these ETB effects that I care about in Perforos, you know, more. However, I also don't think people are going to want to block if they know that's just what I'm going to do. They're just going to be like, yeah, I'll take like the 2 damage, the 1 damage, like NBD, and then it's like, oh, now I'm wide open because all my creatures got through. So didn't really see it as like a great thing for me. However, I do think that this is interesting for red to be able to kind of give this like pseudo blink effect, because the cards that do get blocked can only be played then that turn too. So it's also like you kind of have to skip your first main phase, see what's going to be blocked, and then you can determine what you will play. So not bad, but I love my first Norn. Yeah, my first one is like perfect in every way.
Yeah, because the first one, Norn the Wary, is like, are my opponents playing like Commander at all? Yes, because this is Commander. All right, well, it's going to do its thing. This Norn, however, as you were stating, it's like it really depends on my opponent's choosing to block. Like, this only seems good in my mind where like it's late in the game and like you have a ton of creatures and like you are almost putting them in like a rock and a hard place situation where like you're telling them, okay, I can either deal combat damage to you and all these like creatures I have, or you're gonna block all of them and then my Norn's gonna trigger and I'm gonna get a bunch of card advantage instead. It's like, it's weird. So
yeah, it definitely is a different type of effect and different type of card, but nonetheless cool to see Norn again.
Moving on, we're going to move into green. We are going to talk about Tyvar, the Pummeler. And yes, that's right, Tyvar is back. He is looking very fit and thirst trap inducing in this art. It is 1 in green for a legendary creature, Elf Warrior 3/3. That says, tap another untapped creature you control. Tyvar gains indestructible until end of turn. Tap it. And then it has an activated ability of 3 green. Creatures you control get +X until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So, as always, we have another elf commander. Lots of elf commanders and that have been options throughout the years. So, in that sense, I can totally see it being a commander all on its own, and I can also see it being in the 99 of decks. Either way, it's sort of great because it gives itself protection with its first ability. Like, you're obviously playing a whole bunch of creatures, probably a whole bunch of elves, and it's making itself indestructible, so it's hard to get rid of, which is great. Or it's using its like last activated ability of like 5 mana to like pump up all of your creatures in proportion to like whatever your biggest creature is, basically creating like a huge anthem effect, and probably like it doesn't give evasion, so you will have to figure out how to give your creatures evasions to push through that damage, but it's totally like a pseudo win con in that sense. So it's got a lot of things going for it. It's like Azuri Renegade Leader and Kamal Fist of Prosa in that last ability where they pump up your whole board, and like those cards end games.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things too is the ability to like give them +X is kind of exponential. So you activate it once, you give the buff, you activate it again. Well, now those creatures are bigger, so it's almost like they first double, and then it's kind of a quadruple, and then it would be like an 8 times. So the number of times you can activate this only get significantly better, and I don't think it's that hard to get a ton of mana, especially in mono green, where you could probably activate this easily twice in a turn and just kind of swing in, because it's also not like the creatures that it's not saying like, oh, your creature doubles and quadruples in that sense, but it's like, oh no, I have a Crater Hoof. Okay, everything gets what, +5? Okay, now everything gets +10. So yeah, pretty big.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point. That last ability, it's an activate ability. It is not a tap. So like you can activate it multiple times. Heck, if you have infinite like green mana, like you can just activate it infinitely. And it even synergizes with its first ability because it's not a tap. Like even if you tap Tyvar to make it indestructible for the turn, it can still activate its second ability. It's not a tap ability. I think that's pretty cool.
And it's not sorcery speed, so you know your opponent swings in and it's like, hey, okay, no, I'm gonna tap this twice, or sorry, not tap, but activate this even once, and you know, give all my creatures a buff.
That's actually a great point I didn't think about. Yeah, because a lot of WotC design these days is adding activate only at sorcery speed, but that doesn't say it on this card.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I like talking, like, you know, you read cards when they first come out and you're like, oh yeah, that's good. But then as we talk about them, and you know, I feel like I'm learning more about the card as we talk about it, and I'm like, oh no, this is actually really good when you like think about it for more than like 5 seconds.
Yeah, which is definitely, yeah, I feel the same way, which is definitely how spoiler season is. Like, okay, gotta read a card really quick because maybe in 30 minutes there's going to be a whole new card.
Yep. Okay. This next one is Kona, Rescue Beastie. 3 and a green, legendary creature, Beast Survivor. So it has survival, which just basically says at the beginning of your second main phase, do something. So for this one, if Kona is tapped, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. So that's pretty good, especially when it comes to wanting to attack, and if the survivor survives, you get this benefit. And you know, we just kind of talked about with like Tyvar wanting to attack, and I could easily see this thing give it indestructible through, you know, something, and then just cheating out big creatures into play.
Mm-hmm.
With mono green at least.
Yeah, you know, this does remind me a little bit of like Elvish Piper, in the sense that like, hey, here's this creature, and in a vacuum, like, you're basically putting out like one potentially huge thing every turn. Like, obviously they're different. One's a tap ability, one's a triggered ability, one's a permanent, one's specifically a creature. But that's the similarity I see, where I've definitely played against like an Elvish Piper, and like, wow, that's really hard to deal with. That's a good card. I could potentially see this as a commander, where it's just playing all these fat, green, huge, like, creatures, and not only creatures, but huge, powerful enchantments, artifacts, etc. I could also see this in the 99 of decks. I want to cheat things into play. Maybe they're multicolor decks. The other notable thing about this card is that the wording on this says second main phase. And as I currently understand, WotC has been changing words and verbiage to now say second main phase instead of post-combat main phase.
Yeah, I have heard that with some of the cards. Yeah.
So that's just a small little thing to note.
One other thing I'm going to note, too, is in a game of Commander, obviously you're not playing against just one person. So in a 1v1, Kona has to attack one opponent who, you know, you may not want Kona to attack that person because, well, they have a bunch of creatures. Kona's obviously going to die, and I'm not going to be able to get this benefit. But in Commander, you can attack multiple people, so you can always try and figure out like who is going to either let Kona hit them, or who really can't block Kona, or would have to use a significant amount of resources to like block Kona to, hinder me to get this effect. So, something to think about.
You could also play the Tyvar we were just talking about and tap the Kona with Tyvar. Give Tyvar indestructible. That way you don't even have to go to combat. Not even risk it.
Oh, shit. You're totally right. Or, I don't know, if you're... actually, that's a really good point, because, there are things like Convoke, or... Convoke. Don't ask me to name another way
also the other cards
at the
that,
moment.
Say, your creatures gain tap, add one mana of any color. There's lots of cards that say that, so you could basically tap.
There's a card in this set that says Enduring Vitality. We'll get to that eventually, but yeah, there are other ways to tap.
So you don't have to
creatures
risk your
than
Kona.
just attacking.
Yeah, you don't have to risk going through combat. There are ways around it.
You know what? You're so right.
I know.
All right, read this next card.
Alright, this next one I'll read fairly quickly. It is Nashi, Searcher in the Dark. It is a Dimir card. It costs blue and a black. It is a legendary creature, Rat, Ninja, Wizard, which is a really awesome card type. It is a 2/2 with Menace. That says whenever Nashi deals combat damage to a player, you mill that many cards. You may put any number of legendary and or enchantment cards from among them into your hand. If you put no cards into your hand this way, put a +1/+1 counter on Nashi. So, it is basically a low mana value, easy to cast Dimir commander that cares about attacking and dealing combat damage in order to mill your opponents, and thereby getting you card advantage in the form of hopefully you filled your deck up with either a lot of legendary spells or enchantment spells or both, and gaining, and that's your deck strategy. It is nice, that little last line of text where it kind of is self-enabling, oh, it's not big enough, well, let's make myself bigger for next turn, let's try again next turn with the +1/+1 counter thing. So I just think it's sort of very unique design space for Dimir. Even though it's still milling, it's still milling through the lens of dealing combat damage and a lot of your deck composed of legendary and or enchantment cards, which is not really a design that I've seen explored before. So that's why I want to talk about this card very briefly. Yeah,
I don't think I have much else to say. I think it is cute that Nashi then can pump themselves to have, more power, so then on future attacks they can mill you even more. But, if you have a Delirium strategy, I guess, or a threshold, putting cards into your graveyard's not bad.
Alright, would you like to read this next card?
Yeah, this one took me a bit to try and figure out how it worked exactly, but this is Winter, who is a new character. Misanthropic Guide.
Yeah,
Don't judge me. 1 black, red, green, so 3 colors. Legendary creature, human warlock. Ward 2. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws 2 cards. Alright, not the best. We don't like players drawing cards other than ourselves. But, Delirium. So, as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, each opponent's maximum hand size is equal to 7 minus the number of those card types. So, when you think about the types of cards you have Battle, Creature, Land, Artifact, Enchantment, Instant, Sorcery, Planeswalker. So there are 8 cards. So, I think this is kind of a let me play with as many cards as I can to then try and be able to hinder my opponents as much as possible with as many cards in my graveyard as possible. So, I think another good way of doing this is having dredge cards that would just automatically put a bunch of cards into the graveyard. That would help fill up to equal that Delirium cost, and then you could potentially have is equal to 7 minus the number of those card types. So can you get it so that each opponent's maximum hand size is 0? I think so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. 7 minus those card types. Oh, yeah. So as long as you have 7 card types, that's doable.
Yeah, so at first you think, oh, this is a group hug deck, and then you get to the Delirium ability, and you're like, oh no. Which I think is very like accurate to this character, as I vaguely understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the only thing I think this ability is very interesting, and it's certainly like a build around type strategy. I mean, you're not the one who's going to be hindered by this, so obviously, go off, but yeah, you just need to have some other type of win condition. I don't think it would be unique to winter necessarily, but yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yes.
Like it.
Yeah, cool design. Next up, we have Zimone, All Questioning. 1 green blue for a 1/1. 3-mana 1/1. That's a little bit weird. It's a human creature, or a legendary creature, human wizard. At the beginning of your end step, if a land entered the battlefield under your control this turn, and you control a prime number of lands, create Primo, the indivisible, a legendary 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, then put that many +1/+1 counters on it, and then it has reminder text. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, 29, and 31 are prime numbers. And so I've seen a decent number of people interested in this, in the fact that it is a easy to cast Civic commander that does something somewhat unique, that cares about prime numbers, and is kind of an interesting hoop to jump through. There's like people doing like a whole bunch of like crazy combos with this. Yeah, I think it's kind of cool.
Pop quiz. What's a prime number, Blake?
I just don't think it can be divided by like any. It's like any number. Like it's not like you can do 12 is made up of 2 times 6. I don't think there's any like multiple of it.
Correct. I mean, you got the right idea. It's a number that can't be divided by itself other than by 1. So no 2 other numbers can be multiplied to make that number.
Yeah,
so,
and for everyone sticking in the comments, yes, obviously there's more prime numbers greater than 31. They just ran out of room and didn't want to put etc.
And the likelihood that you're going to have a prime number of lands over 31 is very unlikely.
Yeah, so they know what they were doing.
Alright, so that's what a prime number is. Moving on to colorless commanders, we have Marvin, Murderous Mimic, who is 2 generic mana, my god. Legendary artifact creature toy. Marvin, Murderous Mimic has all activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as this creature. So, and it's a 2/2. Blake, if you want to talk about it more, because I see you have some notes, and explain, go for it. But this thing just seems pretty busted, I
mean, it's a bit weird. First off, it's a colorless commander, which is nice because there aren't a whole lot of those in the commander format. It is weird in the sense of its ability, where it's basically every sort of creature that you have, and so there's obviously ways, even within the restriction of being a colorless deck, where you can make infinite colorless mana with Pillapala and Paladin Mirror, where you tap and untap, tap and untap, tap and untap, and net infinite colorless mana. You still need an outlet after that, so you don't automatically win with that 2-card combo. But I'm sure you can find something in colorless. I don't know. I wanted to bring it up. I don't actually think that many people are going to be interested in playing it as the commander, or even in the 99. It seems kind of like one-trick pony.
Yeah, it seems a little boring. It's strong, but it's I don't know. Like, it could be a little more exciting, I guess. But I don't know what I would do to make it more exciting. It's just like, yep, this is good. Moving on.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, oh fuck. What is that one, like, black ooze, that necrotic ooze, I think? That basically is like, oh, I have all abilities of all creatures and graves, or something like that. And it's kind of just used, like, with other creatures with really unique and odd abilities that just happen. Like, if you stack them all together, it gives you an infinite win. I'm like, okay, cool. Kind of gives that vibe. Kind of a one-trick pony.
Yes.
Like, otherwise, people are not really playing Philippala.
Mm-hmm.
Anywho, we've kind of reached, like, halfway through episode 1 here. And now we're kind of transitioning into the 4 corresponding commander decks for this main set, which kind of have me interested. Yeah.
Yeah. These are some interesting commanders, I'd say. The thing too about these that I think they've done more recently with like every other commander set they've designed, but they did the arch enemy cards in here, which, you know, you can play with those if you want, but they were kind of designed with that in mind, that like one person would be arch enemy.
Mm-hmm.
I especially think that for, I guess, the black-red deck, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
We will get there.
Yeah. So I'll read these first two, because as always with these commander decks, there's a face commander, the main commander of the set, and there's also another potential commander if you want to swap them out. So the face commander is Aminatu, Veil Piercer, which I believe this is the second time we've really seen this character. This time as an actual creature instead of a planeswalker. It is 3 white, blue, black, 2/4, legendary creature, human wizard. That says at the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 2. Alright. And then each enchantment card in your hand has Miracle. Its Miracle cost is equal to its mana cost reduced by 4. Okay. You know, I wasn't that interested in the beginning with the Surveil 2 on upkeep, but then at the whole, like, your enchantment spells basically have Miracle, and, like, the Miracle is reduced by 4, like, holy shit. Like, that's a huge cost reduction. Huge cost reduction. Like,
yeah.
In theory, now all of your, like, not all of your, but, like, your large enchantment spells that cost like 6 or 7 or 8 like is now being reduced by 4, and like I can just see this Aminatu dropping like fat enchantment after fat enchantment after fat enchantment. And Guy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the way Miracle works, like if you have like an instant speed like draw spell on like an opponent's turn, that is your first card being drawn a turn, and it counts as a Miracle. Like you can cast that at instant speed if like you give yourself flash.
Yeah, it would need flash, some way to be cast at instant speed.
Which there are. There's like Ley Line of Anticipation and a few other things.
Right. So it is a little bit of a build around, but I don't think it's the toughest build around either.
Mm-hmm.
It also doesn't necessarily... I think the other big thing too is like, yes, it's enchantments, but you know, you can have enchantment creatures. So this can be a way to cheat in big enchantment creatures into play. Like, I guess I'd have to do like a quick, you know, Scryfall search if you give me a moment, but it is... Oh gosh. No. The commander. White, blue, black. White, blue, boop, boop, boop. So, like, what is the biggest creature you could cheat into play? I mean, Archetype of Imagination, so creatures you control have flying. Fear of Isolation, that's a new one. Fear of Imposters. Perplexing Chimera, which I know that was, like, a big card back in, like, the early days of Oh, the gods of Theros are legendary enchantment creatures. So, you know, you can cheat those into play. You got Thassa, Erebos, Heliod, those guys. And then, I guess, the white-black and the white-blue and the blue-black. So you got a decent number of stuff.
Yeah, so I like this one a good lot. It gives an option like this commander and like the other potential commander in this commander deck. Both are Esper colors that care about enchantments, so it's nice to see Esper color identity caring about enchantments besides Zur. Because for a long time, it's just been Zur. Even with the new Zur, which is arguably like less broken but more fun to play against in a casual pod. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's read this other one. It is the Master of Keys. X, white, blue, black. Legendary enchantment creature for 3/3 with flying. When Master of Keys enters, put X +1/+1 counters on it and mill twice X cards. Each enchantment card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. So, just saying, if you've ever played against Underworld Breach, you know how potentially amazing escape can be. And so basically this gives escape to all of your enchantments within the Esper color identity, and that is fucking bonkers. That is wild, and I love it.
Yeah, it would have been crazy if red was somehow also included in this. And then you give Underworld Breach escape, and then that gives all your cards escape. Wow. I mean, if you have like an Enchantment Matters type deck that's like all colors, you could throw this in there. I'm getting ahead of myself. But no, I think this is pretty good. I love to see escape return. I hope we see more escape. I feel like escape would have... It really fits in the theme of what Duskmourn is meant to be, you know?
Yes. And so we will talk about the new cards within this Esper color deck a little bit later. Right now, as I've stated earlier, we're going to go through the face commander and like the other potential commander of each of these decks. So Guy, why don't you read these next two commanders?
Alright, so we've seen them before, but we got a second version of this card. So Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls, 2 black-red. Legendary creature, Elder Demon. Flying, ward, pay 2 life. So not as bad, I guess. But whenever an opponent loses life for the first turn during each of their turns, put a +1/+1 counter on Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls, and draw a card. So the way that this works is if an opponent loses life, you get a counter on him, only making him bigger. But this also applies to each opponent, so you could potentially put 3 counters on Valgavoth and draw 3 cards. Now, cards like, I don't know, Perforos, who can deal damage to opponents, all your opponents, all at once, are pretty good, because then it's like, oh, let me play a creature, okay, deal some damage, 3 counters on Valgavoth, now it's a 7/7, and I drew 3 cards. Pairing that with something like Norin, and then you just got an engine, baby. You got a stew running.
Yeah, whenever you have like a easy to cast commander that says blah 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 blah, draw a card, as long as the first part of it is like somewhat like doable, like you're pretty much well set for the game. Whenever you have a commander that is a reasonable card draw engine, you're gonna be good. Yeah, and this isn't busted, so it's not like Prosper Tomebound. Like this is totally reasonable. This is totally a like at the same pace as I think the rest of these other commander decks, which is a huge thing. And whenever you're doing like this sort of design, you want all of them to be fairly balanced with each other. And spoilers, I suppose, like I think they are probably all balanced based on everything that I've seen.
I mean, I think this one was definitely meant to be the arch enemy of the decks, only because it was, hey, group slug is the theme, which I love, because it's, you know, gonna, instead of group hug, it's group slug. I'm dealing damage to everyone. Like, no one's can escape the pain. The Lord of Pain. So that is our backup commander, who is the Lord of Pain, 3 black red, legendary creature, human assassin. He has Menache, and your opponents can't gain life. Whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, choose another target player. The Lord of Pain deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to the chosen player. So this is kind of interesting because whenever a player, so first that can count yourself, so you cast a spell, the first spell you cast, you can then choose another target player. So, you know, I choose Blake. Okay. And then if Blake then goes to his turn, casts a spell, and I'm like, okay, Blake just cast it, I can choose another target player. So who am I going to choose? But I'll choose, like, I don't know, Park. So in this instance, it's like you have control of where the damage is going, but it is the first spell. So on your turn, you're obviously going to be wanting to cast the biggest thing first, but, you know, you might want to then politic with your opponents to then say, like, okay, cast the biggest thing that you can first, and then I'll deal it to whoever you want that's not yours truly. So I think I like this. I think it's a fun commander, but this is the type of, like, play patterns that I like to play, you know?
I think it's very good for in a way of, like, alright, making your damage really spread out and make sure, like, everybody's life total is going down. Because that's what you care about. I will say the Lord of Pain reminds me a little bit of Karavek. Specifically, like, Karavek the Merciless, the, like, one that's 7 mana and is red-black, and says whenever an opponent casts a spell, Karavek the Merciless deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target. Like, Lord of Pain kind of reminds me of that. Like, obviously Lord of Pain is a bit more limited in the sense that it only triggers off of, like, a player's cast first spell each turn. But, I mean, I've seen what the other Karavek can do, and, like, being able to, like, whenever your opponents do some, like, play commander, basically, their, like, damage is flying wherever you need it to fly. That's powerful. So I can see this, like, helping a game, like, progress and get you towards winning.
Yeah, I agree.
And there's lots of other cards that say your opponent can't gain life, and so the fact that it says that, plus it's dealing damage, and then it itself is a 5/5 with menace, like, damage is getting through. It makes sense. Like, the name makes sense. Lord of Pain. Alright. Next up, for the next 2 commanders, we are moving into Simic. We are returning to Zimone. Mystery Unveiler. It is 2 green blue for a 3/3 with legendary creature, human wizard with landfall. Whenever a land you control enters Manifest Dread, if this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. Otherwise, you may turn a permanent you control face up. So, honestly, compared to the other Zimone, I've seen fewer people talk about this. Not as interested. Obviously, there's lots of Simic landfall decks, and I'm glad that this is not another busted one. That's really all I have to say about this one.
I mean, this one doesn't require you to know what a prime number is, so that's cool.
Oh, it's not that difficult.
No, prime numbers are fine.
Yeah. Next up we have, I'm probably going to butcher this pronunciation, please bear with me, Cyan, Corrupted Memory. It is 2 green blue, legendary creature illusion 2/2. As long as Cyan's power is even, you may cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. As long as Cyan's power is odd, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Cyan. Honestly, you could put comparisons of this card to, say, the currently banned card in Commander. Oh fuck, what's its name? Guy, help me out here. The like Simic.
Oh, Prophet of Crufix.
Thank you, Prophet of Crufix. But like, obviously, this is not that card. It is less powerful, and like it's only letting you cast one type of non-creature or creature, and it's constantly flipping back and forth because you're drawing cards and like changing the power and toughness. Honestly, I just kind of view this as being a nightmare to track. It's like you're gonna have creature and non-creature spells in your hand, but like you're in Simic, like you're constantly going to be drawing cards. You're constantly going to be changing this, and like I can see people being like, "Oh crap! I drew one extra card, or I drew like some extra cards, and now I can't do the thing that I was planning to do." And like, I feel like people are going to misplay this a lot.
Yeah, I didn't really think about the tracking issue so much, but
because drawing is so fundamental to the mechanics of the game. Like, not even just Simic, just Commander in general. So like, I can just see people like losing track and then like not sequencing properly.
Yeah.
So not a fan of these ones.
This one's interesting. I think one of the big things too that I want to note about this actually is bringing up Nadu, who, you know, was a problem for Modern Horizons 3, not as much for, you know, well, I mean, he's pretty strong. But one of the things that they talked about when they were talking about like why they banned Nadu in or banned Nadu in Modern, but they kind of went into like the design of Nadu and how it came to be. And like the first iteration of Nadu was closer to what Cayenne is now.
Oh, Flash, yeah.
Yeah, and they were like, oh, this isn't just as much fun to just be able to like give all your creatures flash. But I think Cayenne does a better job of like, you know, some things have flash at some time and some things don't have flash at another time. Yeah, I think one big thing too, as I've mentioned in a few other commanders that we've talked about, is like having multiple types of creature or multiple types of card types on a card has been important. Whereas here, if you add a creature type to a card, that does hinder Cayenne and its ability to allow you to cast something at flash speed. So, you know, if you're trying to cast non-creature spells as though they had flash, if that is a enchantment creature, sorry, you can't cast it as though it had flash because it is a creature spell. Yes. That took a lot. Alright, we got 2 more commanders for our last deck, which this is a black-green graveyard deck. Winter's Cynical Opportunist. 2 black-green, legendary creature, human warlock. Death Touch. Whenever Winter attacks, mill 3 cards. Alright. And it has Delirium. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile any number of cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. If you do, put a permanent card from among them onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it. And there are 2/5. Alright. Not bad. I mean, it is very easy to hit the Delirium, I think, in black-green, just because graveyard type strategies. Good. I don't have much to say about this one, actually.
Yeah, it's fine. We can move on to the next one.
Alright, we got... This one's a bit scary. Scarecrow. Thank you. I just needed a little chuckle. Renmaw Creaking Nest. 3 black-green legendary artifact creature Scarecrow. Menace Reach And whenever Renmaw enters, and whenever you play a card with 2 or more card types, each player creates a tap 2/2 black bird creature token with flying. The tokens are goaded for the rest of the game, and it's a 5/5. I just think this is like super flavorful in the sense of like it's a scarecrow that makes crows, and the crows attack anything but you.
Yeah.
Or like I think this is
scarecrow.
cool.
Yeah.
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 And it's like whenever you play a card with 2 more card types, so
it works with the delirium of the other commander.
it does. Though you don't want those cards necessarily in the graveyard, but like, you know, you play a artifact creature, enchantment creature, artifact land, because it's whenever you play a card, it's not whenever you cast a card. There is enchantment lands. We got another one this set. And Valgavoth's Lair, enchantment creatures, enchantment artifacts, artifact lands, enchantment lands. I mean, there are enchantment artifacts. There's like a couple. Yeah. So, you know, just play a bunch of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Make a bunch of birds.
When I saw Renmaw, I honestly was thinking, all of what you're saying is true, but I was also thinking about the fact, like, man, when was the last time we had a Scarecrow commander? Do you know when, Guy?
I mean, the first one that comes to mind is the Reaper King, and I feel like that might be the only one.
You're exactly true. It's been almost 20 years since we've had a Scarecrow
20
commander.
20 years.
Yeah.
I was 8 at that time.
Same, yeah. So, it's been a long-ass time. I still think very fondly of Reaper King. It's very nostalgic. It's a very unique and interesting card design that you don't really see these days anymore. Like, whether it's the casting cost, or the creature, or like its type and super type, or its abilities in general. Like, it's basically Scarecrow typal, and the reward you get is like you get to destroy any target permanent, which is honestly kind of cool. And like over the years we have gotten especially a lot of blue cards that basically say anything you have is like this specific creature type, and you can like choose Scarecrow, and like you can play non-Scarecrows to fill out the rest of your deck, because there aren't that many Scarecrows in like the game. Like if you ignore Changeling and all that sort of stuff. So I have a lot of nostalgia for Reaper King, but I don't think Renmaw is going to replace it as like the most popular Scarecrow commander, but it's nice to see it.
I mean, one thing I did just do a quick Scryfall search, but we did get actually 2 legendary Scarecrows in this set. The other being Swarm Weaver, who I don't think we'll talk about, but, you know, in another 20 years, maybe we'll get like 2 or 3 more, you know? So, yeah. Alright, well that's all of our legendary creatures, and we got a few more for this episode on, like, commander cards from the commander decks, and then our next episode will be 99 cards from the main set. So, Blake, I feel like this next card is very you, so why don't you read it?
Yeah. Excited about it. So this next card is Redress Fate. 6 white sorcery that says return all artifacts and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then it also has Miracle, 3 and white. So, this is the kind of effect where it's returning all of your enchantments and artifacts, and there have been other effects like it, such as like Brilliant Restoration, which is just like 1 mana cheaper. It's like a sorcery. It's a lot more mana pips. So we've seen this sort of design before. However, this is the first time we're seeing it with the Miracle cost. So obviously with Miracle, there's the potential upside that it won't cast as much. And hopefully you're going to be casting it for its 4 mana cost instead of its 8 mana cost most of the time. There's also like Resurgent Belief, which like has this, which is this effect basically with suspend, but the downside of that is like, oh, it takes time, like so much can change in 3 turns. And then I'd say the most direct comparison would be like replenish, which is like 4 mana, but for this effect at sorcery speed, and that's on the reserve list, so WotC is basically never going to reprint that. So this is basically, Redress Fate is basically their homage to replenish and trying to have that sort of effect, but while being less powerful, also close to that power. So I like it a lot.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting way of being able to kind of retrain cards that are on the reserve list, but with like kind of like, I think Echo of Eons was like the very first one that we saw, where it was basically a time twister if you could cast it from the graveyard, where this is now a replenish if it's the first card that you draw for that turn. So you know, I think it's strong.
Yep, I'm excited about it. I'm also excited about this next card, which is a... Okay, first off, this is a Room card. Room is a new type. It is specifically a subtype of enchantment. And so when you look at it, it's kind of like a split card, where you have to like, kind of turn it on its side in order to read it easier. So on one side you have Secret Arcade, 4 and white. Non-land permanents you control and permanents spells you control are enchantments in addition to their other types. And then on the other side is Dusty Parlor, 2 and white. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a number of +1/+1 counters on, equal to that spell's mana value onto up to 1 target creature. So I care about the Secret Arcade side, which basically is an Enchanted Evening effect, but this time instead of being in Azorius colors, it's in mono white. I don't really care about the Dusty Parlor side. I just really care about that ability and the fact that like now we basically have another copy of Enchanted Evening. And if you've ever played against Enchanted Evening and people trying to abuse it in the right decks, it can be really silly and ridiculous. And I'm just going to leave it at that.
I mean, I guess aren't both sides good for you? Because Dusty Parlor can also increase the attack power of Sigarda. Like, I know this is the card you want to... I know that this is probably going to be tested in that deck, but if you're able to benefit from, you know, casting a bunch of enchantment spells, you're also then putting, I don't know, probably 10 power on her, and they're +1/+1 encounters. It's not like it's a one-time buff, it's a continue to buff her type thing.
I mean, that's true. I probably won't put this in Sigarda just because like the deck is already pretty tuned, like most of the deck is already enchantments, so I don't really need the Secret Arcade side. And then the Dusty Parlor side is, I mean, nice for Sigarda because it's a Voltron Enchantress deck, but I feel like I wouldn't be getting the most use out of a card. I mean, it's okay. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely okay, and I wouldn't blame anybody for putting this in a Sigarda Host of Herons deck.
Alright, I mean, I thought that's where this was going, but I might be wrong, but alright. Alright, next we got Fear of Sleep Paralysis. So there have been a decent number of cards in the Duskmourn set that are like Fear of something, so this is one that is Fear of Sleep Paralysis. So it's 5 blue, enchantment creature, nightmare, like all of them. It has flying. It has eerie, which is an ability that says like whenever another enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room. So that kind of relates back to what Blake just talked about with the room. So, you know, you cast the room for one side, and then you can unlock another room at another point, so that would trigger Fear of Sleep Paralysis. So whenever Fear of Sleep Paralysis or another enchantment you control enters, and whenever you unlock a room, tap up to 1 target creature and put a stun counter on it. Stun counters can't be removed from permanents your opponents control. So this is just a good way of being able to lock down the amount of creatures that your opponent has. Because if they can't remove the stun counters, they are going to be tapped forever.
Basically. Now, I don't think this is as strong as like a big blue creature like Nezahal or like one of the Jing Ataxias is, because in order for this card to work, you basically need that Eerie ability, and that Eerie ability, a reminder, only really triggers off of enchantments and rooms. So I do feel like this is a powerful lockdown piece, specifically in certain decks that revolve around enchantments. But I feel like if you're ever going to see this card in Commander, you know shit's about to hit the fan. It's one of those situations like you're not really going to see this card, but in the right deck, like this card is going to be played, and when you do see it, you're probably going to be fucked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a scary card. It's a nightmare.
Literally. All right. Next up, we have Into the Pit. It is a black enchantment, 2 and a black. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast spells from the top of your library by sacrificing a non-land permanent in addition to paying their other costs. So, first off, the immediate comparison is like, oh, a 3-mana black enchantment? Well, how does this compare to like Phyrexian Arena or that other one, like the some Connections, the one where like it's this 3-mana black enchantment that gets me card advantage or like board presence or whatnot. This, in my opinion, is sort of like a diet / mini version of a Bolas's Citadel, where you're looking at the top of your library at any time, and you can basically cast those spells but instead of like paying for life instead of their mana cost, you do have to pay the mana cost, and in addition you have to sacrifice an online permanent. So it's almost like you're getting a 1-for-1, like you're getting rid of something on your board with the idea that like you're using Into the Pit to get something that's slightly better or more powerful, right? So it never actually feels like card advantage. You're just sort of like upgrading your board while getting rid of your board.
Yeah, I think you get the most benefit from this on your turn. I mean, if you're able to cast stuff at flash speed, like go off King, but I can see like, oh, I'm going to cast a creature from the top of my deck by sacrificing something else. Oh, there's a creature at the top of my deck now? Well, I'll just sacrifice that creature that just entered. So there is a way to kind of like, you know, just almost feed into what you need to be able to cast the cards off the top of your deck. So this card is quite good. And I think at like the worst case scenario, you know, hey, I really need to cast this card, I'll sacrifice Into the Pit. Like, you know, just break the cycle. But yeah.
Exactly. Would you like to read one of our last cards for this episode?
Yeah, I included it at the last minute because it's one of my favorite cards from the set. So this is Gleeful Arsonist, 2 and a red, creature, human wizard. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, Gleeful Arsonist deals damage equal to its power to that player. And it has Undying, and it's a 1/2. So the big thing about this is, do you keep this around and it's only dealing 1 damage for every non-creature spell you cast, or do you get rid of it and then it comes back stronger and now everyone has to deal with it for dealing 2 damage for each non-creature spell? So it's one of those things where it's like, how bad is it? It can only get worse. But then it takes quite a bit to like get rid of this. At least 2 removal spells almost. So, you know, I think this is pretty strong.
I'm hoping it's good enough with its like potential 1 damage to that player, and then like they're scared and they have to like waste 2 removal spells on it. That's the situation you want to be in, right?
Yeah, and
Like you don't want to waste your own. I mean, you could use your own potential burn spell or kill spell to like get it up to 2, or maybe you're in a colored entity where like you can pump its power up. I don't know. There's lots of flexibility on this. I love the design of it.
yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty good, especially like also in Perforos, who is one cares about creatures entering the battlefield, so it dies, it re-enters the battlefield. Okay, 2 damage. It's also bigger. But the thing that I've never really cared about Perforos 2 is that it has a pump effect, so you can arbitrarily pump this to then make it bigger.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of bad. Or, yeah, it's pretty bad.
I'm happy for you.
I'm happy for me too.
Alright, we're going to move into the very last part of this episode, folks. This is Seance Board. It is a artifact for 2 colorless mana, or I should say 2 generic. It has the Morbid ability, meaning at the beginning of each end step, if a creature died to this turn, put a soul counter on Seance Board. And then it has the tap ability of add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of soul counters on Seance Board. Spend this mana only to cast instants, sorcery, demon, and spirit spells. So basically, this is a 2 mana rock in the right deck. Not a whole lot of decks want this, but in the right decks, I think this is quite powerful. It's not like Arcane Signet. It's not like the Signet cycle. It's not like the Talisman cycle, where like those can just go in like basically any commander deck of the corresponding color identity. But I think that this is a real all-star in decks like Mono Black Tashiro, where like you're just a Mono Black deck that casts a whole bunch of instant and sorcery speed kill spells. So like you're always triggering Morbid on not just your turn, but every turn, because this triggers on each end step, not just yours. And it's getting a whole bunch of counters, and then before you know it has like 5 counters, and this thing is tapping for 5 mana, and that's feeding back into like your kill spells. Maybe you're a demon typal deck, maybe you're a spirit typal deck. You want Seance Board in those decks as well, because you're inadvertently going to kill your opponent's stuff, I'm sure. So like this is just going to be a great mana rock in that as well. So that's where I'm at. Like you're not going to see this card a whole bunch, but like in the right decks, like I think this is a great, powerful 2 mana rock.
It's only taken 6 years for Spirit Typal to really become a thing.
Yeah. I know.
Back to episode 2.
Big old callback. Yeah, this episode 2.
Yep.
Like honestly, like maybe you're mono red, like a Rakdos deck, like you're killing stuff a whole bunch, and like you're mostly an instant sorcery based deck, like that colored entity too. Like there's a number of strategies I can see wanting this kind of card.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of say that too. Is like for it to be able to have the mana go towards instant and sorceries is pretty big, just because Spellslinger type decks are not uncommon, but like decks that have, or commanders that have like Magecraft or something like that, where it cares about the instants and sorceries that you cast every turn and then getting a trigger off that. Like I think we just got like Ashling, Strixhaven, which was a big one, and I know we're going to be returning to Strixhaven probably in like early 2026. So it's like this card is pretty decent, and you might want to keep an eye on it, because yeah, the more Magecraft or Spellslinger type decks that we get, the more that this card is going to be, I think, relevant.
Alright, so Guy, that has been our first episode where we've talked about the commanders and whether they're in the main set, the commander decks, and a few of the commander decks' new cards. How are you feeling?
Overall, I mean, in terms of new commanders, I got a new commander that I am going to build and basically replace a commander with. So this is my swan song to Avacyn. I just think the strategy that I had with her initially was not working out, so I think the Wandering Rescuer is going to be a good replacement for my mono white deck, and I have it built for the most part, and I'm excited to be able to play that soon. So, that's awesome. I think Duskmourn, already talking about this first part, I'm like, okay, we got some pretty good stuff. And I'm really, really now looking forward to dive into the 99. We got some cards to talk about. I have been more pleasantly surprised with this set than I thought possible. I thought, Outlaws of Thunder Junction was going to be my set, but Duskmourn is pretty awesome. I'm so hyped.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat where I'm not that hyped about the commanders, but I'm hyped about the 99. I'm looking at EDHRec.com and some of our nothing to say commanders are in the top 4. And I'm I don't really care about Jolly Balloon Man. I don't really care about Arabella, the green white legendary artifact creature doll toy. I don't even think we mentioned them. Nico, I don't care about them. But I am excited about the 99. So, I'm excited to move into the next episode.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Alright. Outro us out.
Alrighty. We are the Wizard Staff Podcast. You can find us anywhere you listen to your typical podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere else you listen. Make sure to leave a like and review. It actually really does help us outgrow. And as always, thank you for listening. You're the main reason that we do this podcast. Thank you. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm not calling it X, at WizardStaff101. You can send us an email at thewizardstaff101@gmail.com if you want to bitch and complain about how stupid we are. Thank you again so much for listening, and we hope you have a great night. Peace out.
Peace.